My name is Fanny Davidson, and I'm 62 years old. I spent 20 years saving for my only son, Thomas's dream wedding. When he met Jennifer, I thought she was perfect for him. I opened my heart and wallet to welcome her into our family. I never imagined my son's wedding day would end with me in tears, uninvited, by the bride I helped support through nursing school. Before I tell you how I went from paying for my son's wedding to canceling it within an hour, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join my journey of healing. I became a single mother when my husband Daniel passed away from a sudden heart attack. Thomas was only 8 years old at the time. Losing Daniel was the hardest thing I ever experienced, but I had to stay strong for our son. I took on extra shifts as a hospital administrator to make sure Thomas never felt the financial strain of growing up in a single-parent household. Thomas and I developed an incredibly close bond through those years. Every weekend, we had our special traditions. Saturday morning pancakes, shaped like animals, and Sunday evening walks in the park, where Daniel proposed to me. Thomas would always hold my hand and tell me stories about what he wanted to be when he grew up. His dream was always to become a doctor, just like his father. I worked 60-hour weeks for years to save enough for his college education. When Thomas got accepted to medical school, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. I still remember how he called me, his voice cracking with excitement as he shared the news. That night, I cried happy tears, knowing Daniel would have been so proud of our boy. Thomas met Jennifer during his second year of medical school. She was studying to become a nurse, and they met during hospital rotations. The first time he mentioned her, I could hear something different in his voice, a lightness I hadn't heard before. When he finally brought her home to meet me, I understood why. Jennifer was stunning, tall, with perfect blonde hair, and the kind of confidence that made people stop and stare. She came from a wealthy family in Boston, though she mentioned they were estranged. I didn't pry into the reasons. Looking back, that should have been my first warning sign. There were other signs I chose to ignore, like how Jennifer spoke to the waitstaff when we went out for dinner, demanding never saying please or thank you, or how she subtly guided Thomas's decisions from what he should wear to which residency programs he should apply to. Thomas had always been independent and strong-willed, just like his father. But with Jennifer, he became more passive, always deferring to her preferences. Our weekly phone calls became less frequent. Thomas used to call me 3 times a week, but after Jennifer moved in with him, I was lucky to hear from him once every 2 weeks. When I visited their apartment, Jennifer would make comments about how Thomas needed to cut the apron strings. She'd say it with a laugh, but her eyes remained cold. Despite these concerns, I wanted to support their relationship. When Thomas told me Jennifer was struggling with student loans, I offered to help. I paid off $30,000 of her nursing school debt as a graduation gift. Later, when they found a condo they loved but couldn't quite afford the down payment, I contributed $40,000. I wanted them to start their lives together without financial stress hanging over them. The engagement announcement came after Jennifer finished nursing school. Thomas called me, sounding happier than he had in months, to tell me he had proposed during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. I immediately offered to pay for the wedding. It had always been my plan to give Thomas a beautiful wedding day, and I had saved diligently for it. Jennifer took control of the wedding planning almost immediately. At first, I was included in the email chains and group texts about venues and vendors, but gradually, my input was dismissed, though my checkbook was still very much needed. Jennifer created a separate email thread without me for most decisions, only looping me in when it was time to pay for something. Thomas didn't seem to notice or mind. Whenever I expressed hurt about being excluded, he would say, "Mom, this is Jennifer's day. She knows what she wants." I tried to remind myself that it was their wedding, not mine, and stepped back to let Jennifer take the lead. Looking back, I realize how that decision set the stage for everything that followed. The wedding planning kicked into high gear about 8 months before the big day. I cleared my schedule, excited to be part of this special time in my son's life. I envisioned shopping for venues together, tasting cakes, and sharing the family traditions that had meant so much to me at my own wedding. The pearl earrings my mother wore on her wedding day, the blessing my grandmother wrote that had been read at every family wedding since 1940, the special mother-son dance to What a Wonderful World that I'd dreamed of since Thomas was a baby. None of that happened the way I imagined. Jennifer had already selected a venue before I was even consulted, an exclusive vineyard resort that cost $50,000 for the weekend. When I suggested a beautiful historic hotel where my sister got married, Jennifer rolled her eyes and said, "No offense, Fanny, but we're not going for outdated or budget-friendly." That was another thing. She never called me Mom or even Mrs. Davidson, always Fanny, with a slight emphasis that somehow made my own name sound condescending coming from her lips. Every time I offered a suggestion, Jennifer found a way to dismiss it. The family blessing was too religious. The pearl earrings didn't match her aesthetic. The mother-son dance song was too cliché. Each rejection stung, but I smiled through it all, not wanting to cause problems. One afternoon, we went to meet with the florist. Jennifer was running late, so I arrived first and began discussing some options with the florist, a lovely woman named Patricia. When Jennifer finally arrived, her face darkened, seeing us getting along. "I see Fanny's trying to take over," she said with a tight smile. "Sorry about my fiancé's mother. She's having trouble letting go. You know how older women can get about their sons." Patricia looked uncomfortable, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I was just waiting for you, dear," I said quietly. "Well, I'm here now," Jennifer replied. "And actually, I don't think the arrangements we discussed will work. They're a bit matronly. No offense." That word, matronly, became Jennifer's subtle weapon. When I showed her the dress, I planned to wear a blue silk A-line I'd specially ordered. She examined it and said, "It's nice for a matronly look, but maybe something less prominent. You don't want to draw attention from the bride." I returned the dress and bought something more subdued in a neutral tone that Jennifer approved with a dismissive nod. The worst part was watching Thomas change. My son, who had always been so considerate and kind, began echoing Jennifer's behavior. When I called to ask about the rehearsal dinner, traditionally the responsibility of the groom's family, Thomas informed me that Jennifer's parents were suddenly back in the picture and wanted to handle it instead. "But her parents don't even speak to her," I said, confused. "And I've already put down deposits." "They've reconciled," Thomas said shortly, "and they can afford something more in line with Jennifer's vision." I swallowed my hurt and called the restaurant to cancel, losing my $1,000 deposit. Later that week, I learned from the wedding planner that Jennifer's parents hadn't contributed a penny. Jennifer had just wanted a more upscale restaurant than I had chosen. Through all this, my sister Laura was my rock. "You're being too nice, Fanny," she told me over coffee. "That girl is walking all over you, and Thomas is letting it happen." "What choice do I have?" I asked. If I say anything, I'll just push Thomas further away. The rehearsal dinner was the night before our story reaches its climax. Held at an exclusive restaurant that cost more than my first car. It was beautiful, but impersonal. I'd prepared a short toast for my son and future daughter-in-law, something heartfelt about welcoming Jennifer to our family. When I stood to speak, Jennifer interrupted. "Actually, we're running behind on time," she announced. "We'll have to skip some of the less essential toasts." Her eyes met mine briefly. "You understand, right, Fanny?" Later that evening, I went to the restroom and overheard Jennifer talking to her bridesmaids in the lounge area. "Just one more day," she was saying, "and I can finally get Thomas away from his clingy mother. She's thrown money at us thinking it buys her a front row seat in our lives." The women laughed, and one asked, "What about after the wedding? Won't she still be around?" Jennifer's response chilled me. "Please, once we have the wedding and honeymoon paid for, we're moving to Seattle for Thomas's residency. I've already convinced him it's best to have some distance. She'll be lucky to see us on Christmas." I slipped away before they noticed me, my heart breaking. But even then, even knowing how Jennifer truly felt, I was determined to support my son's choice and make his wedding day special. I had no idea how much worse things would get. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony Jennifer had insisted on. I arrived at the venue early, around 9 a.m., though the ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon. I wanted to help with any last-minute details, and selfishly, perhaps spend some time with Thomas before he officially became a husband. I brought a small blue silk handkerchief that had belonged to my grandmother. My attempt at offering something blue and maintaining at least one family tradition. It was embroidered with tiny forget-me-nots, my grandmother's favorite flower, and coincidentally, the flowers Thomas had picked for me every spring as a child. The bridal suite was buzzing with activity when I knocked on the door. Jennifer's maid of honor, a woman named Sophia, who had never bothered to introduce herself to me, opened it with a look of surprise. "Oh, it's you," she said, glancing back at Jennifer. "The mother-in-law is here." Jennifer was sitting in a salon chair, a stylist working on her hair. She barely looked up. "Fanny, you're early." "I thought I might help," I said, stepping into the room. "And I brought something for you." I held out the handkerchief. Jennifer took it between two fingers, as if it might soil her perfectly manicured nails. "What's this supposed to be?" "It was my grandmother's. You're something blue. It's been in our family for generations." Jennifer handed it back. "That's sweet, but my something blue is my garter. And it's new, not some old, used thing." I tucked the handkerchief back into my purse, trying not to show how much her words stung. "Of course. Well, is there anything I can help with?" "Actually," Jennifer said finally, looking at me, "we have professionals for everything, but you could check on the seating arrangements in the reception hall." I nodded and left, grateful for a task. When I found the seating chart, I was surprised to discover I wasn't seated at the family table with Thomas and Jennifer, but at a back table with distant cousins and Jennifer's former colleagues. I told myself it was an oversight and went to find the wedding planner, Susan. Susan was a kind woman in her 40s who had always treated me with respect. When I mentioned the seating arrangement, a look of discomfort crossed her face. "That was specifically requested by the bride," she admitted reluctantly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davidson. I assumed you knew." I forced a smile. "Of course. No problem at all." As I helped Susan arrange some last-minute decorations, I was surprised to see an elegant couple enter the venue. They looked familiar, and with a start, I realized they resembled Jennifer. These must be her estranged parents. I introduced myself trying to be welcoming, despite my confusion about their sudden appearance. "I'm Fanny Davidson, Thomas's mother. You must be Jennifer's parents. I'm so happy to meet you." Mrs. Reynolds gave me a cool once-over. "Yes, you're the one paying for all this, aren't you? Jennifer told us you insisted." Before I could respond to this bizarre statement, I overheard Jennifer's voice from around the corner. She was speaking to her mother, unaware I was nearby. "I can't believe she's already here nosing around," Jennifer was saying. "She's been impossible trying to take over everything. Thank God, after today, we can keep her at a distance. Thomas finally agrees she's too involved." My heart sank as I realized Thomas had been discussing me with Jennifer, and not in a positive way. I tried to find him to talk, but was told by one of his groomsmen that the groom was not to be disturbed. So I continued helping with decorations, arranging table centerpieces, even though I'd paid for a decorator to handle it all. It kept my hands busy while my mind raced. I discovered other changes that hurt deeply. Jennifer had replaced the mother-son dance song with something modern I'd never heard before. My special reading during the ceremony had been cut due to time constraints. Throughout the morning, Susan, the wedding planner, kept shooting me sympathetic glances. During a quiet moment, she approached me. "You've been so gracious through all of this," she said softly. "I've worked with hundreds of mothers of the groom, and few would be as patient as you've been." Her kindness nearly broke my composure. "He's my only son," I explained. "His happiness is what matters." "Still," Susan said, squeezing my arm gently, "you deserve better." As the ceremony time approached, I fought an internal battle. Should I say something to Thomas about how I was feeling? Should I confront Jennifer about her behavior? Or should I continue as I had been, smiling, paying, and pretending everything was fine? For my son's sake, I chose the latter, believing that peace, on his wedding day, was more important than my feelings. I would soon regret that decision. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Even I had to admit that. The vineyard setting was breathtaking, with rows of grapevines stretching into the distance and mountains on the horizon. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows, with an aisle of rose petals leading to an arch covered in white roses and greenery. Everything I had paid for looked exactly as Jennifer had envisioned. I sat in the front row, the traditional spot for the mother of the groom, only because the seating coordinator hadn't been informed of Jennifer's preference to have me further back. Thomas looked so handsome in his tuxedo, standing nervously at the altar. When our eyes met, he gave me a small smile, and for a moment, he was my little boy again. The music changed, and everyone stood as Jennifer appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. She was stunning in an elaborate designer gown with a cathedral-length train. As she passed me, she didn't even glance in my direction. During their vows, Jennifer included a line that made my heart sink. "I promise to help you become your own man, free to make decisions without outside interference or outdated expectations." She looked directly at me as she said it, and several guests shifted uncomfortably, aware of who her words were targeting. Thomas didn't seem to notice the slight. His vows were sweet and traditional, promising to love and cherish Jennifer forever. I wiped away tears, both of joy for my son and sorrow for the relationship I feared we were losing. After the ceremony, cocktail hour began on the terrace overlooking the vineyards. I tried to approach Thomas several times, but Jennifer kept him occupied skillfully, maneuvering him away whenever I came near. Finally, as guests were being seated for dinner, I managed to reach the head table where they were sitting. "Thomas, honey, congratulations," I said, reaching to hug my son. The ceremony was beautiful. Thomas stood and embraced me briefly. "Thanks, Mom." I turned to Jennifer with a warm smile. "Jennifer, you look absolutely radiant. Welcome to the family, dear." What happened next will be forever burned into my memory. Jennifer's face contorted with undisguised contempt. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor, causing nearby conversations to halt. "You're not welcome here. Go away," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet reception hall. "I've put up with your interference this entire time, but this is my day, not yours." The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to witness my humiliation. Thomas looked shocked, but said nothing in my defense. Jennifer wasn't finished. "Look at you," she continued, gesturing at my carefully chosen neutral dress. "Trying to blend in like you belong at the head table. You've been clingy and controlling this whole time, and we're sick of it. Aren't we, Thomas?" All eyes turned to my son. This was his moment to stand up for me, to remind his bride that I was his mother, that I had raised him alone, that I had paid for this very wedding she was now using as a stage for my humiliation. Instead, Thomas looked down at his plate. "Jennifer, maybe we could discuss this privately," he muttered. "There's nothing to discuss," Jennifer snapped. "Your mother needs to learn her place, and it's not here with us." One of Jennifer's bridesmaids, a woman named Megan, actually took out her phone and started recording my distress. I could see her smirking as tears filled my eyes. I don't understand," I stammered, looking at Thomas. "Sweetheart, just go, Mom," Thomas said quietly, still not meeting my eyes. "You're upsetting Jennifer." I was upsetting Jennifer. The room swam before me as tears spilled down my cheeks. 62 years old, and I was being publicly humiliated at the wedding I had paid for by the woman who had benefited from my generosity for years, while my own son sat silent. Susan, the wedding planner, appeared at my side. "Let me help you, Mrs. Davidson," she said quietly, taking my arm and leading me away from the table as whispers erupted throughout the room. She guided me to a small private office off the main hall, closed the door behind us, and handed me a box of tissues. "I am so sorry," she said, genuine distress in her voice. In 15 years of planning weddings, I've never seen anything like that. I couldn't speak through my tears, the shock of what had just happened overwhelming me. My son, my little boy, who once made me Mother's Day cards with dried macaroni and glitter. He had sat there and let his bride treat me like garbage. Worse, he had taken her side. In the privacy of that small office, surrounded by wedding vendor contracts and seating charts, something broke inside me. But as the initial wave of humiliation receded, another emotion took its place. Clarity. I had spent years making excuses for Jennifer's behavior. I had emptied my savings account to fund this elaborate wedding. I had swallowed my hurt time and again to keep the peace. And my reward was public humiliation and rejection by my own son. "Mrs. Davidson," Susan said gently, interrupting my thoughts. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but this wasn't a spontaneous outburst from Jennifer." I looked up confused. "What do you mean?" Susan hesitated. "Yesterday, during the final walkthrough, I overheard Jennifer telling her bridesmaids she was going to put you in your place at the reception. She planned this, Mrs. Davidson. She wanted to humiliate you publicly." A strange calm came over me. "Thank you for telling me, Susan, and thank you for your kindness today." I took out my phone and called my bank. Thank goodness for Martin, my personal banker, for 20 years who had given me his cell number because of the large transfers I'd been making for wedding expenses. "Martin, it's Fanny Davidson. I need to stop some payments immediately," I said when he answered. "Is everything all right, Fanny?" he asked, concern in his voice. "No," I replied honestly, "but it will be. The checks to the following vendors need to be canceled immediately." I listed the outstanding payments, the second half of the reception venue fee, due at the end of the night, the videographer, who was scheduled to be paid after the event, the photographer's final payment, and the honeymoon resort in Bali. Next, I called my credit card company and explained I needed to stop payment on several recent charges that had not yet fully processed. The expensive thank you cards Jennifer had insisted on, the custom wedding favors being delivered tonight, the day after brunch at a local restaurant. Susan watched me with wide eyes as I methodically canceled every outstanding wedding expense. When I finished, I stood up, smoothed my dress, and wiped the last traces of tears from my face. "What will you do now?" Susan asked. "I'm going home," I said simply, with my dignity. As I walked through the venue to the exit, I held my head high, despite feeling the stares and whispers. Near the door, I encountered an older gentleman who looked vaguely familiar. "Mrs. Davidson," he said, stopping me. "I'm Robert Reynolds, Jennifer's father." I nodded politely, too emotionally exhausted for conversation. "I want you to know," he continued in a low voice, "that what happened in there is a pattern with Jennifer. She cultivates people she can use, then discards them when they're no longer useful. She did it to us for years." "Then why are you here?" I asked. "One last attempt to have a relationship with our daughter," he said sadly. "But after seeing how she treated you, I realize nothing has changed. I'm sorry you had to experience her true nature this way." I thanked him for his candor and continued to my car. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, my phone rang. It was Thomas. "Mom, what the hell?" he demanded without preamble. "The venue manager just came to tell us your check for the balance is being canceled, and the photographer said the same thing." "Yes," I confirmed calmly. "You can't do this. It's my wedding day." "It is your wedding day," I agreed. "And your bride just told me I'm not welcome there while you sat silent. Did you expect me to continue paying for my own humiliation?" "Jennifer didn't mean it like that," Thomas protested. "She's just stressed. You know how weddings are. You embarrassed her by trying to take over our moment." I realized then that Jennifer had already been working to rewrite the narrative, painting herself as the victim. And my son, whom I had raised to be kind and fair, had accepted her version without question. "I love you, Thomas," I said quietly, "but I won't be your ATM while you allow me to be treated this way. I've canceled every payment I could. What happens next is up to you and Jennifer." I hung up as he was still protesting and drove home in silence, a strange mixture of grief and liberation washing over me. The fallout was swift and dramatic. By the time I reached home, my phone was exploding with texts and calls. From Thomas, from Jennifer, even from Jennifer's parents. I silenced it and took a long, hot bath, allowing myself to process the day's events. The next morning, I awoke to over 30 messages. Thomas was furious, demanding I fix this mess immediately. Jennifer had moved from anger to threats, saying she would make sure Thomas never speaks to me again if I didn't reinstate the payments. Her parents' messages were more restrained, but equally firm about my obligation to complete the wedding payments. I responded to none of them. Instead, I called my sister Laura and told her everything. She came right over with coffee and pastries. "Good for you," she said after hearing the full story. "It's about time you stood up for yourself." "I feel terrible about Thomas," I admitted, "but I just couldn't do it anymore. He's a grown man who chose to let his wife abuse his mother," Laura said firmly. "He needs to experience consequences." Over the next few days, I learned through mutual friends what had happened after I left. The reception had continued, but tensions were high. The venue manager had discreetly informed Thomas and Jennifer that the remaining balance had not been paid, and they would need to provide another form of payment before the end of the night. The photographer and videographer both left early when they learned their final payments had been canceled. The honeymoon booking company called during the reception to inform the couple that their reservation had been canceled. The day after brunch never happened. Thomas showed up at my door 3 days after the wedding, more angry than I'd ever seen him. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded, pacing my living room. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Jennifer is devastated." "I do know how humiliating it is," I replied quietly. "I experienced it when Jennifer publicly told me to leave my own son's wedding, and you said nothing." "That's different," Thomas insisted. "You were interfering with our special day by congratulating you, by welcoming Jennifer to the family." "You've never liked her," Thomas accused. "Jennifer says you've been jealous of our relationship from the beginning, that you can't stand not being the number one woman in my life anymore." His words cut deep, but they also confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Jennifer had been poisoning my son against me for a long time. "Thomas," I said carefully, "I've supported your relationship from the start. I paid off Jennifer's student loans. I contributed to your condo down payment. I spent over $100,000 on your wedding. Does that sound like someone who doesn't like your wife? You did those things to control us." He shot back, parroting words that sounded exactly like Jennifer's. I took a deep breath. "I did those things because I love you and wanted you to be happy, but I won't continue to fund people who treat me with contempt. I raised you better than to allow anyone, even your wife, to speak to your mother that way." Thomas left angry, slamming the door behind him. Over the following weeks, the story of the wedding disaster spread through our social circle. Jennifer took to social media, posting a carefully edited version of events that cast me as a jealous, controlling mother who couldn't let go, culminating in my vindictive cancellation of wedding payments. Some people believed her. Others, who had witnessed her behavior at the wedding or knew me well enough to question the narrative, reached out with support. My sister Laura started a fierce defense of me among family and friends. Susan, the wedding planner, apparently refused to work with anyone connected to Jennifer in the future, telling colleagues about the bride's planned humiliation of her mother-in-law. About a month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. Jennifer left Thomas. The details emerged slowly. Without the honeymoon I was supposed to pay for, they had taken a short trip to a local resort instead. There, Thomas had discovered Jennifer had been hiding significant debt. Credit cards maxed out on luxury purchases and secret loans she'd taken out in recent months. When he questioned her spending and suggested they needed to budget, especially with my financial support ended, Jennifer exploded. According to Thomas's friend Michael, who called to check on me, Jennifer had raged that she didn't sign up to marry some penny-pinching mama's boy, and that Thomas had broken their agreement by not ensuring his mother's continuing financial support. 3 days later, she moved out of their condo and filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Thomas was devastated and confused. The woman he thought loved him had abandoned him the moment the money stopped flowing. 6 months passed before I heard directly from Thomas again. In that time, I focused on rebuilding my life and healing from the pain of nearly losing my relationship with my only child. I joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children, where I found comfort in sharing experiences with others who understood my pain. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while focusing so much energy on Thomas and Jennifer. I even started dating again, meeting a kind widower named James through my hospital volunteer work. Laura convinced me to use some of the money I'd saved from canceling wedding expenses to take a trip I'd always dreamed of. 2 weeks in Italy, exploring Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast. As I stood on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace, and the freedom to put myself first after decades of making my son my priority. The divorce between Thomas and Jennifer was finalized quickly. She got the condo in the settlement, the condo I'd helped with the down payment for. But Thomas later told me he was relieved to make a clean break. He moved into a small apartment and focused on his medical residency, working long hours that kept his mind occupied. When Thomas finally called me, his voice was different, humbled, tentative. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. We met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop, halfway between our homes. Thomas looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. The confident young doctor was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost and uncertain. "I owe you an apology," he said after we'd sat down with our coffees. "A big one." "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but neutral. "I let Jennifer treat you terribly," he admitted. "Not just at the wedding, but for years before that. I convinced myself it wasn't happening, or that you were overreacting, or that it was normal mother-in-law tension. But deep down, I knew. Why? I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Why did you allow it?" Thomas stared into his coffee. "I loved her, or I thought I did. And Jennifer had this way of making everything your fault. If I defended you, she would cry and say I didn't love her enough, that I would always choose you over her. She said all men eventually had to choose their wives over their mothers. That's not a choice anyone should have to make," I said. "Loving your wife doesn't mean allowing her to mistreat your mother." "I know that now," Thomas said. "After you canceled the wedding payments, Jennifer showed her true colors. She was furious about the money, not about our relationship being damaged. When I found out about her secret debt, things started making sense. She'd been using me, using us, all along." We talked for 3 hours that day, clearing the air about many things. Thomas admitted he'd been blind to Jennifer's manipulations, how she had systematically worked to isolate him from me, feeding him lies about things I supposedly said when he wasn't around. He apologized for not standing up for me at the wedding, for choosing Jennifer's approval over our relationship. I forgave my son, but I also established new boundaries. I would no longer provide financial support beyond birthday and Christmas gifts. Our relationship needed to be based on love and mutual respect, not monetary transactions. Thomas agreed, seeming relieved rather than disappointed. Rebuilding trust took time. We started with weekly phone calls, then occasional dinners. Thomas began seeing a therapist to understand how he had enabled Jennifer's behavior and to ensure he wouldn't repeat the pattern in future relationships. To my surprise, I developed an unexpected friendship with Susan, the wedding planner, who had shown me such kindness. We occasionally met for lunch and she confided that my standing up for myself had inspired her to address issues in her own personal life. As for the wedding money, I didn't spend. Besides the Italy trip with Laura, I established a personal investment account, something I'd always put off in favor of saving for Thomas. It wasn't a large amount, but it represented something important: my commitment to valuing myself. Thomas's healing journey included volunteer work at a domestic violence shelter, where he gained perspective on manipulative and controlling relationships. He told me it helped him recognize patterns in his relationship with Jennifer that he'd been blind to before. 6 months turned into a year. Thomas completed his residency and accepted a position at a hospital in our hometown, rather than moving away as he and Jennifer had planned. Our relationship grew stronger than before, built on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The experience changed me profoundly. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to establish clear boundaries. That generosity without self-respect isn't really generosity at all, but a form of self-harm. That standing up for yourself may feel terrifying in the moment, but brings peace in the long run. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't determined by how much I give or how much I sacrifice. It's intrinsic, unchangeable, and not dependent on anyone else's validation, not even my beloved son's. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't what you give, but what you finally have the courage to withhold. In canceling those wedding payments, I lost money, but reclaimed something far too valuable: my dignity and self-respect. If you're struggling with a difficult relationship, remember that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy connections. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? Share your experience in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and growth. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when it breaks your heart to do so. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to value yourself in all your relationships.